Glendale Planning Commission. Could we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Berman, Commissioner Lee,
Here.
Commissioner Kane,
Here.
Commissioner Sheets,
Here.
Commissioner Torgerson,
Here.
You've run out of commissioners. Okay. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, February 25th on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Great. Please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next agenda item is oral communications. I have no speaker cards on that. So we're moving to item 6, which is an appeal.
Approval of minutes?
Oh, you're right. I went right past that. Thank you very much for keeping me on line, Mr. Sheets. Comments or any comments or corrections to make to the minutes of February 18th?
I move the minutes.
I actually have a small correction.
You would. Getting back at me.
Under discussion by commissioners on page 2, middle of the page, Chairman Kane remarked that Mr. Delfonso's concerns were not related to the project. Strictly speaking, I said they weren't related to the action in front of us. His concerns were absolutely related to the project, just not what we were doing. And that's the only correction I'd like to make. So we have a motion.
Now that you've brought that up, I did make a point of clarity. I don't think we have to adjust the minutes, but on the second page, under staff, Mr. Allen Loomis gave a PowerPoint presentation. As I was writing that, I wrote partial PowerPoint presentation. That doesn't have to be changed. Second.
Motion support. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheets,
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson,
Abstain.
Chairperson Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 3-0 with an abstention. The minutes of February 18th are approved as noted. And we'll move on to agenda item 6, the appeal. It's PVAR 2008-014. It's 120 East Cypress Street. It's an appeal of the zoning administrator's denial of a standards variance to allow an open parking space in the front yard setback where landscaping would otherwise be required. The recommendation is that the decision of the zoning administrator denying the variance be sustained and the appeal be denied. Can we have staff overview, please?
Good evening, Chairman Kane and Commissioners. The item before you came to the Planning Department from Neighborhood Services, in which the subject property was cited for creating a parking space and parking in a front yard setback without first obtaining clearance from the Planning Department. As stated by you, the property is located at 120 East Cypress Street. This property is zoned R2250 with the design development overlay and parking structure development overlay zone. The appellant filed standards variance case number PVAR 2008-1014 in an attempt to legalize and keep this parking space. The request went through a public hearing before the zoning administrator and was subsequently denied. The appellant is requesting that the commission reverse the zoning administrator's decisions. I have behind you pinned up a site plan drawing showing the configuration of the property as well as the building, the location of the proposed or the subject parking space in question, and characteristics of the lot, showing the green showing the green area showing the landscape areas, while the gray is the paved or concrete areas, and the brown is the building. I also have the zoning map showing the zoning designation of surrounding property. The property is bounded by Brand Boulevard as well as Glendale Avenue, which are two main commercial thoroughfares in the city. There are also photos of the subject property as well as photos of the parking space in question. And the applicant has submitted additional photos of a similar property with parking in the front setback. And in addition, I have photos of the surrounding area illustrating the parking condition and the situation that exist in the area. And that concludes staff overview of this request.
All right. Do we have questions for staff at this moment? Seeing none. All right. Yes, Mr. Torgerson.
I do have a question. It appears there is a single parking space existing right now in front of that place.
Correct. That is
The
the
proposal to,
legalize
Leave
that.
that?
That parking space was established, as stated, without planning approval, and was cited by Neighborhood Services.
gotcha, okay.
All right. No further questions of staff at this time. I only have one speaker card for that matter. It's the owner of the property. So, Mr. Chan, this is your time to present your case.
I just want to make it known that when my family purchased the property, there was already a parking space in front. It was just not overpaved. It was just inlaid with brick. We did not knowingly violate any zoning laws that we know of when we repaved the property when we put in our new driveway. So in my appeal, I also enclosed, which is not up there, a revised proposal in which we would like to install creek grass, similar to the property on 128 West Cypress Street, which also has parking in the front setback. In the revised drawing, we would remove the current parking slab and install creek grass, as well as plant higher hedging to soften the effects of the proposed parking spot. Currently, on our street, we have, I believe, six high residential buildings, all apartments. We also have the Toyota dealership. We have the bar, Los Feliz retirement facility, and a couple other apartment buildings. The Los Feliz retirement facility has enough parking for itself. Our building, as well as the other apartment buildings, do not have sufficient parking for their own tenants. When this building was built, it does not comply with the current standards. So we only have 7 parking spots for a 10-unit building. So I implore you to consider our case.
Is there anything you want to add this time?
Well, aside from the fact that there is not enough parking, there is the Toyota dealership uses the street parking for their customer parking, and the customer uses our street as parking for when they need their cars repaired or to buy a new car. On Thursdays and Fridays, there is street cleaning, which either side of the street is closed off for parking. On Maryland, there is not enough street parking there as well. There is also a couple buildings that already have parking in the front set. They had to overpave to provide parking for their own tenants as well.
Okay. Questions from the commissioners?
Just for the record, he did indicate there were 7 parking spaces, and I did bring this up to Mr. Dong.
Sure.
And in your application, on the drawing, you do show 8. Yeah.
The architect who drew our site plan misprinted the parking situation, and there is actually 7.
Right. So actually, it is worse because you're showing 8 parking spaces for 10 units. Now you have 7 parking spaces for 10 units.
And just to tag onto that, didn't you, in one of your, I didn't find it this moment, but I thought you had stated in there that this would be the 9th parking spot.
This would be the 9th parking spot.
Oh, is that
As you
considered
can
two?
see, I'm sorry, as you can see in the back of the building, there's an indentation right where the building is.
I see.
Right there.
Yes.
We use that as the, we use that as the 8.
Okay, I get it.
And that is actually 7 covered parking spots. So this would be the 9th
So
parking
does
spot.
that qualify as a parking space? That little indentation, it looked pretty small to me.
Well, it
It
depends.
actually fits a vehicle.
So small car?
It fits an SUV.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah.
Well, in order for the planning department to recognize that as being a legal parking space, it would have to meet the dimension for
Width and depth? Or
correct
width and
with
length?
for the width and the length, as well as the backup turning radius.
You happen to know what that dimension is, by any chance? Just
Not
don't happen.
offhand, I'm sorry.
I don't know that
I
it's
don't think-
germane, but it's
I
interesting.
don't
It's at
think
least
that-
20 feet deep.
Yeah.
This drawing's to scale, it's 20 feet deep, so that's sufficiently deep. And then width-wise, it's
It looks wider than
Doesn't have dimension.
I've had tenants parking there for 30 years.
Okay.
It's
back in the days of the old caddies, huh?
when Model Ts were growing.
Now I'm sorry, were there other questions from the commission?
Not right now.
That raises you said you've had tenants parking there for 30 years?
Yes,
When did you or your family purchase the building?
back in '83.
Okay,
It's 80.
all right.
20
And you're saying since you
20
purchased the
years, I
building,
guess.
since you purchased the building, there's been pavers and vehicles parking in that area?
In the front setback?
Yeah,
Yes,
since '83?
since before then,
Okay,
but since '83 for sure.
right. I would just put as an aside, because I don't think it'll be in front of us,
Okay.
but I wonder about an easement of some sort being granted as far as open and notorious use for 25 years. No matter how we act on it, it might be something of a implied easement, similar to what somebody would be if they were driving across the
Over
property.
public property?
I'm sorry?
Over public property? Or over a neighbor's property?
Well, clearly over neighbor's property, it would.
Yeah.
There's some law involving, 7 years or some duration?
5 years, but you can't get an applied easement over publicly owned property.
Okay, what about the use of it as a parking space on private property?
In terms of whether that complies with zoning or,
Whether that would, again, because they've done it for so many years, if that would be, like I said, implied acceptance because they've done it for so long without anybody catching them.
oh, no. In terms of applied acceptance by the city? No, it wouldn't. There's
All right.
no.
I was curious about it. Thank you.
I also brought that point up because I thought we would be able to grandfather that due to the fact that we've had the property for so long without.
And go ahead,
Any
please,
objections?
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, in your application, you also cite 128 West Cypress.
That is correct.
Yeah, which is, which has the front parking, and which has been allowed, granted with conditions, and that's a grass-creek parking
Yes.
space. Now, and you stated in your application too that when you apply for this, variance, that you did not apply, for that, but now you're applying, with the creek, grass creek, parking space there. So that really changes from the time when this was up for review by the ZA. Now you're bringing a new element in here.
I'm sorry. I just thought we would there would be a little back and forth negotiation. Exactly. So
my question is.
I'm sorry. We already have the parking space already installed. We're not creating a new parking space. So it didn't make sense to remove the existing space to install something new. But if it is an issue, we would have been willing to install the grasscrete.
Okay, so I guess my question is that, are you proposing to do that?
Yes, we
Now?
are. Yes, we are.
Okay, so you're, because, when we make the decision on your, whether we reverse or,
Sure.
accept this, application, that's based on, your application before. But now you're bringing new criteria here for us to consider, and I wanted to make sure that, that was something that,
Well, actually, and I think what we'd find, and I actually failed to read the statement about how we consider this a de novo hearing, and I think on that basis, it's okay, unless it's really a huge difference, where we could still remand this back to staff. But I think on the basis of de novo, we have it as our flexibility in how we act.
right, okay.
If you feel in the course of things that's significant and you want the ZA to take a fresh look at it, we can. Mr. Garcia?
I was just going to concur with your statement there, Mr. Kane, that essentially it is a de novo hearing and it really doesn't need to be remanded if it's a change that's not that substantial.
I mean, if we decide it is, we can do
Right,
that.
okay.
We would be more than willing to remand this back to the zoning administrator if the current proposal does not reflect what we're appealing currently.
Well, what my chair is telling me is that we could do that here, so.
Okay.
We can work with it.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this? Okay. In terms of process, I'd like everyone to go first. Now, a couple questions. I'd like to know about the process during the ZA hearing,
Okay.
because a lot of this give and take, was that brought up at all during the hearing? Was that you, Ms. Fuentes?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I originally heard the case, and as a matter of fact, in fairness to the applicant, after the public hearing, he met with the case planner, Brother Duong, and we were the one who talked to him about grasscrete or concrete, the similar material that was used in the other case. And we told him, this is so close to the other case that perhaps if he revised the layout and do a little bit more landscaping and with the use of the grasscrete instead of solid concrete, that you may tend to either look at it in a different manner or...
Well, I'm curious about a few things, and I don't expect staff necessarily to hold someone's hand, but as you know, the public, when they come in, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most of them.
Right.
Except for, of course, the civil engineer that we see pretty much every week. I thought he'd stop by just for the heck of it. So my question is, you knew this appeal was coming,
Yes.
okay? Did you have conversations with staff before the appeal?
Before the appeal, yes.
So you had conversations with them ahead of time?
Not before the application, the initial application.
Application versus appeal. So you filed an application, and then you just came in and weren't sure what the process was going to be. I'm kind of putting words in your mouth.
Sure.
But you weren't sure what the process was going to be. You had the hearing, and then you started meeting with staff.
Yes.
So it was cart before the horse or whatever.
Yes.
Because a lot of what you're facing here might have been headed off if and this is for anyone that happens to listen or for future applicants, they ought to have a session before they actually go into the hearing. And I'm wondering, when staff gets an application, whether, and maybe this is something later for comments, there ought to be a little proactiveness saying, do you want to have a conversation with us before the actual hearing?
Well, I think they're having some kind of back and forth conversation with the case planner, not necessarily with me.
Fair enough.
But there are also differences between the previous case and this case, so we're trying to make the gap kind of meet and see.
Right. I guess I'm just wondering on what's a relatively modest issue, whether we grant it or not. It's relatively modest. That for this to have gone to this extent, for him to have to have paid this money, it would have been nice if this had all been dealt with at a staff level before that.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we gave him the option of withdrawing the appeal, and if he would like to go through the newly proposed project or material, that he could reapply. The fee that he used for the appeal could be used to
Reapply.
Right, and then given.
And so he made the decision. You made the decision to appeal versus reapply.
I'm terribly sorry, but
that's what. Yeah.
I didn't get that from our conversation.
Well, that's what we told him, that he could either just reapply with the new layout and the new material, or he could go through with the appeal and either ask the board to remand or just go through with his proposal and see where the board is going to take it, from there.
Okay, because again, I'm just,
Yeah.
wondering why it got to this point type of
I know.
thing.
I'm terribly sorry if I did not get that from our conversation, but I really did not.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was an option to reapply to.
Right. Well, we discussed the 6-month period before filing the same application, but I think that was a deciding factor to just go on with the appeal, which may be a few weeks shorter than rehearing the case.
Yeah, but we know very well that Neighborhood Services is really happy to stop all enforcement during sometimes 4 and 5 year,
Definitely.
discussions. So,
Right.
okay. The other thing then is once the appeal's made, as we know up here on the board or the commission, there are findings that are made or denied, and there were 4 findings
Sure.
that the ZA made in denying your application. For us to approve your application, we have to overcome each of those.
Okay.
And basically, and sometimes they accept them. You may only have to argue one out of the 4 points. Sometimes you have to argue all 4. But for us to overcome this, we need to find that path to disagree with the ZA. And so there's a burden on you or any other appellant
Sure.
to be able to address specifically what's been going on with that.
That's exactly why I brought up the prior case, PVAR 2005-015, and our revised proposal, which would reflect upon how we would argue against the 4 findings.
Did I miss? Yeah, here it is. I was going to say I thought we got that as part of our thing.
Yes, you did.
So let me put it to you, Ms. Fuentes, at this point. You've seen the response to West Cyprus, right? Were you the ZA on that particular one?
Yes, I am. I was.
So you saw your arguments and your positions on West Cyprus. You saw your decision on East Cyprus. Where do you see the difference fundamentally?
I can give you all the differences. Mr. Chair, members of the board, again, the 2005 case, which was variance 2005-015-128 West Cypress Street. The city's Public Works Department removed the on-street parking available on the south side of the street. Hence, they were forced to park within or on their property.
Okay.
That's one of the main reasons. So this resulted in hardship or practical difficulties for those existing properties with legal non-conforming parking situation. The other difference is the 128 West Cypress is, I think, only a 2-unit or a 3-unit apartment building. This is a 10-unit apartment building. The like I said, the removal of the on-street parking was not a self-imposed hardship, or it resulted in hardship or practical difficulties for.
It wasn't self-imposed.
Right, it wasn't self-imposed. And then the applicant, judging on the aesthetic and visual impact of pure paved area versus grasscrete, we saw that having grasscrete versus concrete, it looked more like a landscape area, and he decided to also add more landscaping at the front and on the side
I'm
of
sorry,
the property.
he is West Cyprus?
He is the applicant.
The previous one, not
the previous
this case.
applicant.
Okay.
Decided to work with staff in adding more landscaping and providing more buffer. Like if you're driving from the street, you will see landscaping instead of the paved area. So he turned around the parking. and it could very well happen on this property also. The other thing is the grass grate did not, like I said, create a negative visual impact on the neighborhood. And I think he was the only one on that side of the street that was heavily impacted by the removal of the city's on-street parking. And that's the main difference.
Okay. Thank you, because I wondered about, why the difference.
I know. And
Do you know, has parking been reduced on your street through any action from the city?
Not from the action with the city, but probably due to the economic downturn, there are fewer customers for Toyota. But when Toyota is busy, the parking is non-existent.
I understand, but
Wasn't there-
but in terms of additional red areas, red lanes, red curbs, I should say.
No,
What's it say?
not that
I'm
I
sorry,
know.
Mr.
I'm
Torgerson.
sorry, you'd mentioned street cleaning periodic. Do they have you can't park on this side of the street on
Exactly.
Tuesdays, and you can't park on the other side on Wednesdays or something like that?
Exactly, yes. On Thursdays, you cannot park on where the East Cypress, my building, my side of the building. You cannot park on that side of the street, and on Fridays, you cannot park on the opposite end.
this one.
I believe that's the same for Maryland. I am not sure, 100% sure about that, but it would make sense.
So there's additional reduction of parking that's not self-imposed by the applicant.
Yeah, it's interesting to search for a path, depending. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Also, Ms. Fuentes mentioned that the owner of the 128 West Cypress did work with staff regarding correction in landscaping. We're more than willing to work with staff as well regarding this matter.
Does staff have current recommendations ready if we act on this today as far as some of the things, or do you see it as an evolving process?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I brought the previous site plan for the 128 West Cypress, and maybe if they'll give you a little idea how the layout of the parking worked out from the driveway within the front setback. So if you like, I can put it up. And
I think that's appropriate.
you can see the difference.
I don't know how we'll vote, but if we're going to do some.
I'm not convincing you one way or the other, but I thought
Oh,
it
right.
will help because it's so close, so similar.
If we're going to do conditions, it might be interesting to consider that.
The grass creek, does that qualify, the whole area qualifies as landscaped area, or is it only a portion of that qualifies?
It's still not, but it's just for visual.
So also it doesn't get any credit towards the
Oh,
landscaping?
It does not.
Oh, that's a good question.
So that's the 128 West Cypress. You can see where the applicant added landscaping buffer.
Screening,
Right,
parallel
screen
to
from the
sidewalk.
front and also on the side next to the next door neighbor.
And that's because he had a certain amount of setback.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at this moment? Or for the speaker? And we've kind of, there's normally a very formal process, but since basically you're the only interested party and staff's here, we've kind of blended your statement, their statement. You have a rebuttal time. You've been kind of working through that. I just want to say formally then, in terms of this process, before we go into deliberations, are there any other rebuttal points that you want to make very clear in terms of why the denial should be overturned?
In terms of our similarities in terms of both projects, I think we're so similar that with the amended proposal that I'm proposing, that it would work.
And again, what you're willing to do, maybe you should state that again
Sure.
for the record. You've indicated some willingness to do things. What
We
were-
are willing to work with zoning in terms of softening up the visual impact of the grasscrete as well as whatever conditions that are set forth to keep the existing parking space, either by breaking it up and removing it and reinstalling grasscrete, but to keep the existing parking in the front setback.
Is that assigned parking
Yes,
for one
it
of your
is.
tenants?
Yes, it is currently.
So you charge added rent for that space?
No, I do not. I do not charge rent for parking.
So it's just, okay, but it's assigned to one of the tenants?
Yes. It's located to the first unit, so,
I see. So you kind of assigned it to that unit, okay.
but the tenant also has an option to move in the covered spot, given they have 7 and it goes by seniority.
Okay, all right.
Hedges in front?
Yes, there are currently hedges in front. I'm not sure if
Short.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Short one, yeah. Short.
we can raise those hedges, but currently we have the younger Japanese boxwood, which could grow
I
maybe
mean,
2.
they'll raise themselves.
Yeah, they'll raise themselves.
Just, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but relative to the landscaping, I noticed that the pylons there, that's Schedule 40 with cement in it, so it's not, it's more of a
I'm sorry?
Bollards?
ballards, exactly. It's plastic conduit, it's like 4 or 5 inch conduit. It's not an actual metal.
Those are metal
I'm
posts.
sorry, I don't understand what you're
But the
saying.
post.
You have
Oh,
a
the
post.
Those are metal posts filled with concrete.
Yeah, it is a
Metal
metal post, yes.
Those are metal.
It says Schedule 40. I never saw a Schedule 40 that was metal.
Well, I'm not a contractor.
It's not, I'm trying to get clarity that if we're talking about the landscaping and what's there, I wanted to make a point that that's Schedule 40.
Well, I think those post bollards,
Or
plastic pipe,
decorative.
steel pipe, whatever they are can certainly be in play as it
Yes.
relates to any potential deliberations.
I just
or-
think that's what it is. That was more my point.
Okay.
I made it a point to see the printing on it.
Did you bring a magnet?
I did not, but when I scraped with my finger at the,
Very good.
Stainless, it wouldn't have worked anyway.
Oh, through that.
We did have a wooden fence right where those metal posts were. We had a letter from Neighborhood Services to remove the fence
How tall was the
Fence in the front.
because they said we're not supposed to have
How
fencing.
tall was the fence?
It was 3 feet.
Okay,
Or
there's your
about
problem.
just as tall.
Y-
But
y-
then 6 months later, after we removed it, they wrote another letter saying that we did not have to remove it. So what I'm trying to say here is that we've always been complying with the city of Glendale. We've been more than willing to help with,
we can go on
work with the
this
city of Glendale, and I just hope that we could continue this
We don't want to-
relationship.
we don't want to
Yeah,
miss.
I think you actually would have been allowed 18 inches. Those are the 3 feet they got upset with.
Okay.
Okay. Unless there's other questions of staff or the appellant, I'm going to close the public hearing and go into deliberations. All right? So we're into deliberations. Thank you. You can sit down for now. Thoughts, gentlemen? Who'd like to lead off?
Yeah, I don't know.
I know.
I don't think this case should have really made it up to this point. From the conversation we had, the opponent is willing to work with the city, and then the city also has suggestions. And we're actually, in the same boat as far as what we want to do. I think it's just the development of the language now. I was there looking at the property, and I did not find the parking space, so I had to park on that front parking spot to look at the property.
I'm sorry, you pulled into the parking spot?
I
in
pulled
question?
into that, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Tried it out.
I tried it out. But that was the only one that's available. And, his property is sandwiched between Brand and Glendale, and it is a small street, but it's busy and it's occupied by all the cars there. So whether it's imposed or not imposed, that's out of his control. And then there's a lot of other people using the street. I saw that, and the willingness to work with the city and all that. And it sounds like Grasscrete was allowed in some of the case, and it is pointed out some of the different conditions from this case to the other case, but I don't really see that much of a difference between 128 West Cypress and 120 East Cypress. So I'm kind of leaning towards, granting the parking space now, except for that it has to be grasscrete, has to have the hedges to make it, hidden, and also remove those metal posts so that it blends in with the rest of the grass there.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Well, Mr. Kane, this is a primary example, I think, of something where a variance is appropriate. The strict application of the provisions of the ordinance would result in practical difficulties in that it would make him less compliant with the current parking requirements ordinances. So adding an extra spot that's already there doesn't seem to be objectionable at all and does not seem to be inconsistent with the purposes and intent of the parking ordinance. The exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved or to the intended use that do not generally apply to other properties in the same zone or neighborhood. Well, depending on how big you call that zone and neighborhood, there's lots of other properties that were built when the codes were changed and they have sufficient parking. And how a 10-unit place could have been built with less than one parking space per unit is history and kind of beyond me, but I'm glad we changed the ordinance to make new buildings have sufficient parking. So I think we could make finding B, and finding C is the granting of the variance will not be materially detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the improvements and so forth. I won't read the whole thing. That neighborhood is semi-industrial anyway, and it's the parking space already exists, and I think the improvement of putting in the grasscrete and the hedges, and which we've already got planted, and maybe replacing those bollards with something that they could work out with staff that's a little more aesthetically pleasing would eliminate any objection to making the finding C. And the granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance in that you have to balance, I don't know how to put this, you have to balance the objectives of one ordinance with the objectives of another, against the objectives of another ordinance. So you got an ordinance that says you have to have X number of parking places per unit, just because it's practical and people need to park. And then you got another ordinance that says you can't park in the front. And I think the objective of providing sufficient parking for units, even if you've got to kind of fudge and let people park in the front, overrides any intent of the don't park in the front ordinance. That wasn't very eloquently put, that last one, but that's the general idea. So I would be in favor of granting the, reversing the zoning administrator's decision and approving this with the conditions that we've already discussed about the grasscrete, or remanding it back to the zoning administrator, whichever seems to be the most, I'm getting psychic inputs from the other side.
I think if the commission feels comfortable making a decision, you should go ahead and do that without remanding.
Without remand, okay. I didn't know which would be most practical in terms of the bureaucracy.
Now you've used two words that are never used together. Practical and bureaucracy.
I commit an oxymoron, so
It's all military intelligence. It goes on.
You know it's going to develop the motion here now.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think if we remand, we won't. Mr. Sheets.
Yeah, I have a question first for the staff. What is the zoning state for the issue that we're here for? The issue we're here for is parking in the setback, right?
Right.
And what does it generally state? I mean, in my mind, it means that you can't
just don't
park in the setback. I don't confuse that with the issue of how many parking spaces, and I know that that's another problem that he has.
That's another code.
Yeah, another issue, but I don't see a conflict. To me, I've been looking at this from the standpoint that the issue is to try to not have parking in the setback, for various reasons. Is that it, or is there more detail or specifics to that code?
That's the issue
Okay.
we have is parking within the front setback area, and also the.
Well, also the zoning code states that on any given lot, in areas where they are not taken up by a building, a walkway or pathway, and driveway shall be fully landscaped. That's the other part of the code that where this request falls into.
Okay. So to add to my confusion, because I was looking at this whole issue that way, when I compared the two requests, one for 128 and the one for 120, I believed each one as I read it, but I see them in total conflict. It became so subjective that I wanted to agree with the variance for 128, and I went out there and looked at it, and then when I read the one for our applicant now, I wanted to agree with that, but I don't understand what the difference is. I don't see the difference between landscaping something differently, making the zoning variance correct as far as parking in the front.
Well, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sheets, like I mentioned, the main or the major difference was this one was more like a self-induced hardship.
Well, I see.
The other one was triggered by the fact that the city eliminated the on-street parking, and we did it in 2005.
Okay.
And that was the reason, one of the reasons that I looked into that made a big difference on these two cases. But it's, like I said, exactly the same request and the same violation of the setback ordinance and the landscaping ordinance.
Okay. And that's what I see. These issues are exactly the same from that standpoint. My picture is the reason you don't want to have parking in the setback is you don't have a car in that setback.
Correct.
And no matter how I landscape it or how much hedging I put in there. Now, one other item that came to mind as I was out there, the other applicant applied for a variance. And it went through the process, and that's great. I think it worked the way it was intended to. First, I'm extremely impressed with your presentation and your actions. You're being forward, and it's clear in my mind what the true situation is out there and how long this has existed. The one thing that bothered me at first was that this was done without a request, and that troubled me. But knowing that how long it's been there, and the fact that I believe what you tell me, that there was parking occurring and there was some bricks laid down or something, that's had impact on my thoughts about how to deal with this issue. You still should have, you need to know if you're going to put concrete in front of your house, to that extent you need to get a permit to do it. But, so I'm confused. I haven't decided yet, mainly because I see a subjectivity issue between the two applications, and that troubles me, because if for lack of a better term, if I try to be a purist about it, we don't want cars parked in front of buildings. And if it hasn't, this exists, so it's not like we're going to trigger something because of what action we take tonight. You already parked there, and people have either used that as an example or they haven't. So if I haven't made it obvious on other occasions in the commission, I like to stick to what the zoning says, because if we start breaking that down, then in my mind, and maybe I'm being too harsh about it, then we start to weaken what the zoning's about. So I'd like to reserve making a choice right now, because I'm I have mixed emotions about the whole thing, but I'm very impressed with where we are, with what's done, what the true issue is here, and I truly have not decided at this moment, but I will take a choice. I'd like to hear what you have to
Sooner or
say.
later, you'll have to.
I will. Well, there's still room. I mean, I have to make a choice.
And Commissioner Sheets, this is exactly what I enjoy about this process. They call it deliberations for a reason. It's frequently the case that, and one of the joys of being chairperson is I get to go last.
Yeah, I know.
I can act confident. I'm in total control because I've heard everybody's thoughts and it's given me a chance to think.
I'm trying to change that.
You
tonight.
guys have it tough when you're leading off because you're just out there by yourself. For all you know, you're going to say something. The four of us are going to look at you and go, "Where did you come up with that?" So, in any event, terrific. I'm going to signal probably after this where I think we might want to go with this. When I visited the subject property and the reference property, and I went there on a weekend, and I went to the reference property, and I went, how, why did this get passed? Because I got to tell you, having a vehicle in the front yard, I swear to God I was in Kentucky. The good news, it wasn't up on blocks. But that's next, So I was just stunned. So I appreciate staff telling me that there was actually some reason behind the madness. It's still terrible, but, I understand that person was really put into a box when their parking disappeared. So in general, the idea of front yard parking is, there's a reason for it, and I'm in total support of no front yard parking. Now, the things that cause me hesitation, similar to I think doing this since at least 1983 when they bought the property by testimony. Why it took the
city of Glendale a quarter of a century to notice that somebody was doing something like that boggles my mind. So
Looking for fences first.
Yeah, apparently. Well, there was a fence. They were told to put down the fence, and nobody brought up the parking. I mean, it just boggles the mind.
Possibly maybe the concrete is recent. And
that's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly
The concrete triggered it? Okay.
Yeah, more noticeable.
Now, okay, well, very good, because it's, so the fact that it's been going on for so long, gives me it kind of mitigates the thought process that I was going in. Clearly, the grasscrete is a softening aspect to it, and it looks great until you throw a car on top of it, and then you've got a car in the front yard. So
on what looks like grass.
Right, and I am so sympathetic. I wish this was in front of us because we have to make difficult decisions. Oh boy, I'm so sympathetic to the property owner and the fact that he has all these apartments and these pre-existing conditions. And I can grasp at a straw and say, when they bought the property in 1983, the Brand Boulevard of cars was not creating the amount of impact to their neighborhood. So I'm sympathetic on that. And I'd love to find a way around that, short of throwing a car into somebody's front yard. Now, the way they've got it, however, is somewhat mitigating in that it's adjacent to the driveway. In some ways, I'm more happy if it got approved to just be a straight in, be done with it, and walk away. I mean, in some ways, softening it and trying to swing around and throwing in on the grasscrete is going to create a bigger imprint. So I'm a little up in the air on that whole thing. Where I kind of feel, though, and we're still waiting to hear where Mr. Sheets finally comes down, but right now we're looking at 2-1 in favor. It might be 2-2 deadlocked, which means it stays denied. I'm on the fence, but I have to come down on the side of no cars in front yards. What I'd like to suggest is that if that's where Mr. Sheets ends up on the side of no, is that perhaps we want to continue this until we have a fifth member and actually let the full board do a 3-2 vote either way. And we're putting the pressure on the absent member, but that's the beauty of it. Because I'm a little reluctant on a 2-2 vote to have it denied, have it denied on that basis. So what are your folks' thoughts on it? Well, first off, Mr. Sheets, where do you feel now?
I think you're reiterating what my thoughts were. It's what I was trying to express. I'm not, in my mind, the grasscrete is not an answer, because it looks like they're parking on the grass. It looks great when there's no car there, but it doesn't solve the issue of a car parking in front. If I had to compare the two, I think your parking situation looks better than the grasscrete. But in my mind, I'm trying to do a balance of how long the building's been there, when you've been there, what you've done, how upfront you've been about it, and the fact that we're trying to not have that. And one will lead to another. And somebody at some time in the future will use your parking space as an example. And that's what we're trying to prevent. But I also know we're here to try to be fair about those things.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my other concern. To use the cliche of slippery slope,
Yep.
is the appellants already tried to use West Cypress as an example. Now, we know West Cypress, they got rid of all the parking. So there's clearly a difference there. If we're allowing this, there's a lot of underparked places in this community.
Especially in that area.
Well, that area or just throughout. Anybody could say, well, that grocery store wasn't there when I built this apartment building. So I'm really concerned about that aspect of it, the whole, that's what I'm looking for. Precedent, I'm sorry.
Before we continue, the applicant's been trying to make a comment. Can we let him do that and see if it changes anything and then follow through? Is that inappropriate?
I'm happy to reopen in the hearing because we are truly in deliberations, and allow him to share a few more comments. So we'll reopen the hearing. We're going to allow the appellant a couple minutes to respond to what he's heard in deliberations. Please, you do need to.
Okay, I just want to make a quick point. The parking is already in existence. For other property owners to use this as an example and just pave now would be detrimental to what the ordinance is trying to propose. My property had the parking space before the wooden fence. It was already paved. We just put the wooden fence there. But please don't use my case as a I don't know what the word is.
A precedent.
Yeah, to set the precedence. Precedence was already set with 128 West Cypress. My case is I already have the parking space there. We are trying to. Currently, the tenant, they don't come home till 5. So when there's no parking spot, I mean when there's nobody parked there, it would look like a garden.
Landscaped.
It would look landscaped, and then when it comes back at 5, which is dark.
Well, that would be an interesting condition. So what you're basically saying is maybe we should have a condition that no one parks there in daylight?
Or, no, you just have to have a green car.
That would be agreeable.
I'm just saying.
I would agree to that.
That may actually, create some room, because when it's dark, it doesn't bother anyone when it's dark. It's daylight that's the problem. It's like the grasscrete. It's not a problem until a car parks on it.
I'll have some more comments when we get back to deliberations.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So you were saying, as far as you're concerned, a condition of no parking in daylight would be a better than nothing
would be
at all.
acceptable. I know it is pretty bad right now.
So what do? You post a parking sign there?
I mean, it doesn't look like Kentucky on our current situation, because there is a concrete slab. There is parking right there already available for the tenant, and it's been there in place.
All right. We've heard your remarks. We're going to reclose the hearing,
Mr.
re-enter
Chair,
deliberations. I'm sorry. The hearing's still open.
Mr. Chair, just because the items kept coming up about the fact that this parking space has been in existence for a long time, it's the planning department practice is that just because, in this case, a parking space has been existing for so many years, if it's illegal to begin with and was never recognized and permitted by the planning department, it remains illegal today.
Oh,
So
we understand that.
if this argument holds truth, then other people who's listening in the audience and at home may say, well, they may extend that argument to other zoning violations such as addition, illegal window replacement. So that is something I would like to just bring forth.
All right, I'm glad you shared it. Now, I'm seriously going to close the hearing, you guys. All right,
Yes.
we reclosed the hearing. We're back in deliberations. Mr. Torgerson, I think you had some thoughts.
My thoughts on the parking in the front is, why did we prohibit parking in the front in the first place? We prohibited parking in the front in the first place because we didn't want it to look like some rural setting that you described. I don't want to offend anybody from Kentucky. But, yeah, we didn't want to have cars up on blocks with grass and weeds growing up and between the tires and stuff like that. And so the intent of the ordinance was to preserve the aesthetics of the neighborhood. And in most neighborhoods, I would be 100% behind your argument that, no, we don't want parking in the front. In this particular neighborhood, it's my opinion that parking in the front isn't going to hurt the neighborhood because it's already a very industrialized neighborhood. There are other lots with parking in the front, and the street is so congested with cars already that you'd barely notice an extra car sitting in the front of this apartment building. And so I believe that the necessity to go toward the objective of the other ordinance that I was referring to is that apartment buildings should have sufficient parking for their tenants. Now, his apartment building was clearly built before the current ordinance, but today's objective for that ordinance is that we have a civic-minded duty to try to help people find adequate parking for their...
He'd need 20 spots plus 5 for guests.
Right.
Or, I'm sorry, 2 for guests.
To me, it's more important to allow an extra parking spot to come closer to meeting that current desire to provide adequate parking for tenants, as opposed to strictly adhering to some ordinance that is meant to preserve the aesthetics on a street that already has major aesthetic problems because it's very industrial.
I have a comment just to follow that up. When I was there at the site, what I saw next to his property was a parking lot. And then another lot next to it, I think, was another parking lot. So to me, and then across the street was auto parts, the dealership there, and then there was a apartment building. So
The very parking place.
To me, it looked very blended into the neighborhood because it was not clearly the very far building, the apartment building, also had actually driveway in front of the apartment that had garages, setback, but you could actually park cars there. So, when you look at that environment, or if I see a residential area with all the, the driveway, grass, and all that, I mean, this is something that I'm absolutely with you that you should not have cars in the front. But I already see buildings in the block that has spots for car parking in the front, in front of the building, and also the parking lot that's right at the street level. That's butting up against the street, on I think both sides of the building. So, that's what when I went there, made my mind as to this doesn't really look that out of place.
All right. I mean, I hear both statements. And that's why I'm sympathetic. That's why I think if we're going to be 2-2, we should continue it to allow an actual vote rather than a deadlock. Now that said, we're coming back to you, unfortunately, Mr. Sheets, or fortunately, to get a sense of whether your thoughts have evolved a little more.
Well, the more we talk, the more good input I feel we're getting. But I can still keep my same view that the ordinance doesn't state if the block is this way and if there's a parking lot. I know what you're saying, and it works. But if you want to carry that further, if that's what the perception is today by individuals, somebody in another area is going to be able to say, the code says that, but we've had examples in the city for various reasons, and I think you got to realize there are people now, we have I worked for years in an environment where we used the amount of people that would talk on phone lines in a house, and it was like 1.5 or 1 1/8 or whatever, but we knew that there were more phones going in over the years, and we didn't allow for that, and we always put in the wrong amount of facilities. So the parking today in this city it is overburdened. We're in parking jail. There's no way out of it. So every time we make an exception, it throws it off. I mean, it doesn't make it any clearer for me, because there are people have more than one car, more than 2 cars, just as a matter of fact.
But by taking an existing parking place that's been there for 30 years and forcing them out onto the street, that's making the parking worse.
I understand that, but I still go back to what the staff said. It's illegal. That is his problem. It's not his fault, but it's illegal. So
Well, that's why we have the variance process.
I understand, and that's why we're
No, I
talking
just have
about
a comment about the setting the precedence. I mean, I think when we review the case here, each case and every case is unique and is really, it has its own merit to its own case. I don't really think that I believe that this is going to send the message where we're setting the precedence here. And there's also, I guess, sometimes logic has come through, and sometimes the consistency of the neighborhood has to, I think, come through, and I think that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, I know what the ordinance says. I know what the variance is there. I mean, the zoning code is there we have, and it is our job to have a strict, enforcement of that. But sometimes, there's a famous saying: rules are made to be broken, and sometimes you need to bend the rules a little bit, to accommodate the situation, and I think that's where I'm coming from.
I think everyone has expressed their positions well. I don't mean to cut off deliberations, but I think we've all made our points at least once. And but I can tell from the discussion that if there is a motion to overturn, it appears that it'll be a deadlock. And out of sympathy to the appellant, and for all the situation he's gone through as far as appeal versus notification versus staff involvement, for all of that, for all the other things that the people in favor of the appeal have brought up, I'm not willing at this moment, I would be unwilling at this moment to simply have a deadlock and deny it. So on that basis, what I'd like to suggest... Yes.
I was just going to add to that. The code, with respect to appeals, and we had talked about this at the last meeting, with respect to appeals, whether the board or the commission wants to affirm a decision or reverse a decision, it needs 3 votes. Normal procedural rules, a 2-2 tie would uphold the lower decision, but our code has a specific provision requiring 3 votes in any case. So you're going to it's a unique provision.
I thought we've been. Was this for conditional uses?
This is for
we've been in situations in my time on boards where 2-2 has become a de facto upholding.
The only case where that might happen is on something not an appeal, or where you only have 4 members on the commission.
I mean, an empty seat.
An empty seat.
Okay.
But where we have a full commission, I think the code requires that any decision would need the majority vote.
And that might have been the conditions. All right. So that said, I don't see us going 3 votes either way. So we would continue the matter.
You should continue to I'm not sure when the next to date certain, so you don't without further notice.
We won't have to advertise. Right. Now let me ask: there's no enforcement action going on right now. The gentleman's not getting tickets or anything like that.
It stayed until
the
final decision.
So the longer we stay, the better in a way for the appellant.
How about option of remanding back to the CA?
I don't know that the remanding will do any good.
Yeah, because they're
going to soften some things, but we're already there in the deliberations.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Garcia, you wanted to say?
No,
you were just anxious. All right. So I think what we should do is continue to a date certain to avoid further notice. and that we should wait for our fifth member, assuming that Mr. Berman will be able to join us at the next meeting. Or do we have?
Do you wanna be
You will not
able-
be
I
there.
will not be able to join you at the next meeting.
All right, well, let's coordinate that date certain then.
We have a meeting on April 1st.
Is that the one you can't be at?
Well,
I'm
the
going
next,
to be, I'm going to be on travel the week of March 16th and the week of March 30th. So if you're going to
The
have a
week
special
of?
meeting
All
on
right,
April
so we'll need
1st,
to
I
do it.
will also miss that.
So we'll want to do the Ides of April.
April 15.
Right. Well, how appropriate is that? Everybody will be in a good mood that day. So at this moment, it appears that we would have 5 members. If it turns out we don't, we'll continue the matter again, unless we can, unless we have a sense of 3 votes. So that would be my recommendation, that we have a motion to continue to April 15th without further notice, that we seek to make sure that we'll have 5 members at that meeting, and that we make sure that we instruct or urge or cajole the 5th member to watch this on tape / streaming, whatever. And I would ask staff to make sure that a copy of this meeting get made and delivered or mailed to that member, so that he has it in different formats. VHS, beta, no, whatever. Would you suggest anything else?
No,
before,
just to add to the record that he does need to review that to be able to participate in the
Yes,
decision.
you would.
So
Right. That's
we'll
the
pass that on
concept
information along to
behind
him.
the cajoling. Would someone like to make a motion to continue the matter as to April 15th?
Mr. Chair, I make the motion that we continue this matter until April 15th.
Second.
I have a motion and support. Could we have roll, please?
Commissioners Lee,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Torgerson,
Aye.
Chairperson Kane.
Aye. On a vote of 4-0, the appeal PVAR 2008-014 at 120 East Cypress Street is continued until April 15th. Okay. If you have questions for staff, you can ask them off, not in front of us, but just off on the side.
Thank you.
You bet. Old business, we have none. New business, we have none. Planning Department updates, please.
I don't have any additional updates.
Comments from commissioners.
Yes, I apologize. My work schedule has gotten to where I've got to have to be up in the Bay Area on the 17th and 18th, and I don't think I could get back in time to show up for the meeting unless I came right from the airport. And I'm not sure of the agenda yet.
Do we actually have an agenda for the 18th? Because
Yes.
you talked about the 1st.
We do
Yes,
have an
we do.
appeal. It's 2425 Cascadia appeal.
Okay,
It's up
24, 25, Cascadia.
Cascadia.
You're going to be in the Bay Area, and you're not
Well, if
sure if
he's-
you'll make it?
He's not going to be here.
Yeah, and I have to talk to the Mr. Garcia about my participation in an appeal on Cascadia. Since
Oh,
I
you
live in
might
Cascadia.
have a...
Anyway, so
a conflict.
maybe it's no big deal. And then on the 1st of April,
because where I was going with that is if, and again, appeals at the risk of offending fellow commissioners, maybe we would have to move the meeting to 6 to allow for your participation. What else is on the agenda for that night?
That's it so far.
All right, so we,
and that's
Make
on
sure.
the 18th.
but that will be dependent on whether or not you need to recuse yourself. Let me ask my fellow board members, if that's the only thing on the agenda, if it's a light agenda, and again, you know how I like to have everybody participate in appeals for just the reason we had today, would you gentlemen object if the 5 o'clock meeting became 6 o'clock to allow for better participation from commissioners?
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
notices, just to let you know, notices have already gone out for the May
And it
15th.
says 5
Or
o'clock.
the March 15th, March 18th meeting.
Yeah, so it's too late to affect
No,
that meeting.
no, not necessarily. I'll show up, and we'll open the hearing, and then we'll just go into recess for an hour or so.
You can't do that.
not-
We should obviously give notice to the people we've already given notice if we're going to do that.
Right, 'cause
Well,
he'll
I'm
be
just
here.
coming up with
if you want
ideas
to.
to make
He'll
this.
be here at that time.
Or we can
Well,
move it.
well,
We can move it
How
to another
difficult is
date.
it for you to send the notices again?
I don't know.
Who are the parties in that appeal? Who's the appellant? Or the-
Well, I believe it was Dick Murray, so it was the Chevy Chase Homeowners
Yes.
Association, and I know they've had
well,
because
Mr. Murray passed away last
right,
week.
and so I know there's a new person who's now involved in that.
Larry something, I forgot.
Larry
Larry Varnes.
Larry.
It's the new.
Yes.
Okay, my potential conflict of interest. I live on Kennington, but that's well away from the 300-foot or 600-foot, 500-foot radius, because Mr. Garcia and I already talked about that. But I'm also on the board of directors of the Chevy Chase Estates Association.
We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, and that raises a point. So was the appeal was fired by Mr. Murray as an individual or as a representative of the association? Don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I'd have to look
I
that up.
think on behalf of the association.
We'll look at that. And then,
It was probably
I'll
on
speak
behalf
with-
of the association because of the cost would have been borne by the association as opposed to Mr. Murray personally.
Well, so there's some things to consider there. Plus, given the fact that Mr. Murray has unfortunately passed away, it may be that Chevy Chase would want a continuation anyway because of the representative's gone. So what happens?
Well, they've already had a
They've
meeting
had
with
somebody.
them. They have a new. That's why Mr. Barnes is now the person who's leading the appeal.
So they've made that change.
So there was a meeting. I know.
So
they
they're prepared to continue on their part.
Well, they're still reviewing the cases and the files, so we could check with them if they would need additional time or if March
It would
18th.
seem to me there's plenty of time to notice them an hour change in that.
Well,
Is that
so,
possible?
Well, so here's where it's at. We made it really clear. We can meet an hour later. If Mr. Torgerson is able to participate, then we're able to meet an hour later to allow for him perhaps to attend. Secondarily, it may be that the appellant, Chevy Chase, would like to reschedule anyway, given what's going on with, again, the changes in their organization.
Well, and they're very
We're
busy.
flexible. We're flexible.
We'll contact
As a
them.
commission, we're flexible.
Okay.
The idea is we want to try to get, if we can, 5 members
5 members.
participating,
Exactly. Okay.
short of breaking the law.
We'll let you know. And I think on planning department's report, Laura, we may want to mention that the zoning code amendments went to City Council last night, and they already approved the change in the use variance.
Did they?
Yes. It's going to go to you.
All right.
And the other things that, like the 50% rule,
3?
except the walls and fences, they made it a little bit more severe. That if it's visible from the right-of-way, they're going to have some kind of review, 3 feet on
Good.
above.
That's positive. So the use variance went through.
Yep.
Anything from the commissioners? Seeing none, could we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll consider us adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. We'll let you.